My name is Ulla Anderson, and I was 61 when my husband decided to end 15 years of marriage like he was sending back a dish he didn't like. It was our anniversary dinner. Grilled salmon, lemon butter, the same restaurant we'd returned to, year after year, with the same low lighting that softened faces and made everyone appear kinder than they actually were. The kind of place where the servers lowered their voices instinctively, as if they were custodians of other people's secrets. I wore a dress that had been hanging untouched for months. He wore the navy blazer I bought him 2 years earlier. Even on the night he planned to dismantle our life, he still wanted to look like the reasonable one, the man doing the hard but necessary thing. Across the table, Mark placed his fork down with that slow, deliberate precision he used whenever he wanted a moment to feel official, as if he were about to issue a formal ruling. "I'm going back to my ex-girlfriend," he said. No lead-in, no warning, no awkward pause. Just the sentence, clean and cold. I blinked once, not because I didn't understand, but because my mind reflexively tried to correct it, the way it fixes a typo before you even register it. Surely he meant he'd seen her, or run into her, or spoken to her and felt something resurface. Then he delivered the line he'd clearly been holding on to. "I never really loved you." He studied my face like he was waiting for an explosion. That was what he wanted. Tears, shaking, pleading. A performance. Me unraveling while he looked burdened and noble. He wanted a story he could retell later, about how I lost control and he had to protect his peace. How I was too emotional, too much. Instead, I did the one thing that threw him off balance. I nodded. I set my fork down neatly. I smoothed my napkin across my lap. I took a slow sip of water, careful enough that my hands wouldn't betray me. "Okay," I said. "Okay?" "Yes." I met his gaze with a calm that bordered on polite. "Then you should leave." It was subtle, but I noticed it. His mouth tightened for just a moment. Not relief. Confusion. The confusion of a man who rehearsed a speech in the mirror for weeks and suddenly realized the audience wasn't reacting at the right moments. He tried again, as if another approach might trigger the response he wanted. "You're not going to say anything?" I leaned back slightly, keeping my voice soft, almost clinical. "What is there to say? You've made your choice." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I could practically see the recalculation happening. People like Mark don't know what to do with silence. Silence doesn't give them anything to twist later. And that's when it became clear to me. This wasn't spontaneous. It was timed. He chose our anniversary deliberately. He wore that blazer deliberately. He made sure our daughter, Rachel, was away for the weekend deliberately. He cleared the house of witnesses so he could leave cleanly, without resistance or complications, which meant he hadn't just planned to leave. He'd planned to take. He finished his meal anyway. That part almost impressed me, the discipline of someone who believes the ending belongs to him. He dabbed his mouth with his napkin and asked the server for the check as if nothing had changed, as if we were still a normal couple. When the bill arrived, he didn't reach for it. He watched me instead. Another test. Another trap. If I paid, he could later claim I was trying to buy his forgiveness. If I refused, he could call me bitter. I slid my card into the folder without hesitation, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted the night to end on my terms, not his. On the drive home, he hummed softly, like someone walking away from a meeting they believed they'd won. When we pulled into the driveway, he didn't look at the house the way someone looks at something they're leaving behind. He looked at it like a prize he'd already divided in his head. Inside, he transformed into a sulking teenager, packing loudly, slamming drawers, making passive-aggressive calls on speakerphone so I could hear the brightness in his ex-girlfriend's laugh. It was higher than I expected, too bright, like a woman trying hard to prove she still mattered. I stood in the hallway and watched him move through our home as if he were staging an exit scene for a made-for-TV movie. He dragged a suitcase toward the door, then paused and finally delivered the line he'd been polishing all night. "I guess I'll finally get half of everything." He said it slowly, letting each word settle, waiting for me to flinch. I didn't respond. I leaned against the kitchen doorway, my arms folded loosely, and watched him study my face, searching for something. anger, fear. What he found was nothing. That was what made his eyes narrow. He didn't understand that I wasn't numb. I was done. He left without slamming the door. That mattered. People who slam doors want attention. Mark wanted control. He wanted it to look clean, mature, mutual. He wanted to say later that he handled it calmly. The door clicked shut, and the house fell quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not peaceful exactly, more like the moment an appliance shuts off, and you suddenly realize how loud it had been the whole time. I waited, not because my heart was breaking, but out of habit. 13 seconds after the tires crunched over the gravel, I walked into my study. This wasn't emotion. It was procedure. 7 years earlier, I'd watched a friend lose everything in a divorce he never saw coming. The house, the savings, the retirement. He called me from a studio apartment that smelled like cheap detergent and regret, and asked, how did it happen so fast? I remembered staring at my kitchen counter while his voice cracked, feeling something settle inside me. Not fear, clarity. Love isn't a contract. Marriage is. And contracts can be engineered. Mark thought my obsession with paperwork meant I was old-fashioned, controlling, boring. Boring was his favorite word for me. Predictable, safe. He never realized he was describing a fortress. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a small black lockbox I hadn't touched in years. The metal felt cool under my fingers, like it had been waiting. Inside were 4 things: a USB drive, notarized documents, the fully executed postnuptial agreement, and a sealed envelope labeled in my handwriting. I laid everything out, switched on the lamp, and watched the warm light spread across papers that once seemed paranoid, and now felt inevitable. Clause 7 was simple on the surface. Spousal abandonment trigger. Mark had signed it. So had I. He'd laughed in the notary's office, joked about me watching too many legal shows, brushed it off like a harmless quirk. I let him believe that. I opened the envelope and reread the sentence I already knew by heart. The wording mattered, intent mattered, timing mattered. I picked up a pen and wrote carefully, steadily. Spouse Mark Anderson has voluntarily vacated the shared residence, with intent to end the marriage. Date, signature. Then I opened my laptop. Boot sequence, local encryption, biometric confirmation. The screen lit up like it had rehearsed this moment. In a way, it had. I navigated to the private directory, the asset structure I'd built slowly over years. Every account, every entity, every holding arrangement, all legal, all documented, all designed to respond like a nervous system when the right nerve was pressed. There it was. Clause 7. Trigger. Spousal abandonment. My cursor hovered over the word execute. This is the part people misunderstand. They think preparation comes from bitterness or obsession, but it wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was design. Mark believed he was walking away with half of everything. What he didn't realize was that the moment he left, he stopped being a partner and became a third party, and third parties don't get access to the vault. I clicked. A green progress bar slid silently across the screen, smooth and steady. No music, no drama, just the quiet sound of a life shifting shape. By the time his car disappeared down the street, the house had already been reassigned, accounts isolated, beneficiaries updated, access revoked. He could still log into Netflix. I left him that. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, listening to the new silence of my home. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like space. Tomorrow, Mark would call a lawyer. Tomorrow he would start telling his version of the story, the one where he was brave and I was blindsided. But tomorrow he would learn something he should have understood long ago. He wasn't leaving me. He was leaving the perimeter I controlled, and the gates had already closed behind him. I slept better than I expected. Not deeply, not peacefully, but without the weight I'd grown used to carrying, like taking off a coat you don't realize is heavy until it's gone. The house was quiet in a way that felt intentional, not abandoned. Every clock ticked, every floorboard settled. Nothing demanded anything from me. At 6:12 a.m., I made coffee. At 6:14, my phone vibrated. Not a call, not a message. Years earlier, when I was still consulting in risk auditing, I'd built a private monitoring tool to flag reputational risks and unusual activity patterns. Old habits don't disappear just because you retire. You forget they exist until they wake up. I'd left Mark's name on the watch list, not out of jealousy, but routine. The alert opened to a public social media post. There he was, Mark, his arm around her. The ex-girlfriend he said was his future. Champagne flutes raised, faces pressed too close together, smiling like they were reclaiming something stolen. The caption read, "True love always finds its way back. Finally free." I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt curiosity. My eyes went straight to the timestamp. Posted yesterday at 4:27 p.m. I checked the date again. Yesterday. 3 hours before our anniversary dinner. 3 hours before grilled salmon and lemon butter. 3 hours before he sat across from me and said he'd never really loved me. That detail changed everything. This wasn't impulse. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a man stumbling back into old feelings. This was premeditated abandonment. And premeditation alters the entire equation. I zoomed in on the image, not their faces. The metadata location services embedded in the upload, device model, time zone alignment, GPS coordinates matched a rooftop bar downtown, the same one Mark once said was too loud when I suggested it for my birthday. I opened the postnuptial agreement. Clause 9b, premeditated abandonment with intent to defraud the spousal trustee. We added it after my lawyer asked one question during negotiations years ago. What if one spouse stays just long enough to cash out? Mark had laughed then too, said I was dramatic, said love didn't work like that. Love doesn't. But strategy does. Clause 9b required proof of intent before marital departure. Evidence of alternate romantic engagement, concealed communications, or public declarations that predated the separation, a time-stamped photo with an ex-girlfriend. That wasn't just evidence, that was a signature. I downloaded the image, extracted the metadata, confirmed the GPS coordinates, uploaded the full report to my asset protection log. Violation confirmed. What Mark thought was the celebration was actually a confession. I forwarded the file to my attorney, with one line in the subject field. Clause 9b activation. No message body. He didn't need one. At 9:03 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Downtown prefix. I let it ring twice before answering. The voice was young, polished, confident in a way that only exists before someone realizes they're out of their depth. This is Kyle Benton, attorney representing your husband, Mark Anderson. I wanted to reach out before proceeding with formal filings. Of course he did. We'll be filing for divorce, based on irreconcilable differences, he continued. Naturally, my client is entitled to an equitable division of marital assets. We'll be seeking his share of the primary residence, brokerage accounts, and jointly held vehicles. There it was, the assumption. He spoke like I was stunned, like I was cornered, like I'd be grateful for his professional courtesy. I suggest you have your counsel contact me, he added. It'll make this smoother. Avoid unnecessary conflict. I took a sip of coffee. Go ahead, I said calmly. There was a pause. He'd expected resistance or confusion or questions. Instead, I opened my email. Attached 3 documents. The fully executed postnuptial agreement, the trust structure schematic, the Clause 9b activation packet, with metadata evidence. Subject line, Anderson v. Anderson. Preliminary materials. No greeting, no signature. I clicked send. The silence on the line stretched. M. Anderson, he said finally, and his voice had changed. Thinner, tighter. I'll need to review these. You should, I replied, carefully. Click. 6 minutes later, my phone rang again. Same number. This time, I answered immediately. M. Anderson, he said, and the confidence was gone. He claims he was unaware of the postnuptial agreement's enforcement mechanisms. He did not disclose any trust structures. No, I said he wouldn't have. Another pause. Papers shuffling. someone else speaking quietly in the background. This changes the landscape significantly. Kyle admitted the time-stamped post, the premeditation clause. This may require internal review. That's wise. Then he said the sentence I'd been waiting for. My God, what did he tell you yesterday? I smiled. He told me the truth. Click. By noon, the email had been opened 7 times, forwarded 3, accessed once from a mobile device. Standard legal triage. I pictured Mark somewhere, probably at a cafe with her, watching his phone buzz while his lawyer read aloud clauses he'd once mocked. I imagined his face tightening with each paragraph. The slow realization that the boring woman he underestimated had already locked down the battlefield. I didn't need to imagine long. At 12:43 p.m., Mark walked into the bank. I knew because I'd already spoken to the branch manager earlier that morning. Robert was a kind man, methodical, unflappable, the kind of professional who never raised his voice but never bent his spine either. Mark approached the counter with confidence, the kind that comes from believing money obeys familiarity. I'd like to withdraw from our joint savings, he said, sliding his ID across the counter, and transfer half into my new account. The teller typed, paused, typed again. I'm sorry, sir, she said carefully. Your name is no longer associated with that account. Mark laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. We've been with this bank for 15 years. She swallowed. One moment, please. Robert appeared minutes later with a thin file in his hand. Mr. Anderson, he said gently, please come with me. Behind closed doors, Mark's world started shrinking. Robert laid out the documents: beneficiary reassignment, account isolation, trust directives triggered by spousal abandonment and premeditated breach. Mark stared at the pages like they were written in a foreign language. There's been a mistake, he said. I need that money. Robert pointed to the signature. His signature dated years ago, witnessed, notarized. I'm sorry, Robert said. There's nothing I can release. Mark left without shouting, without slamming anything. He walked back through the lobby slowly, his shoulders tight, his jaw clenched, sunglasses already on, to hide the panic rising behind his eyes. By the time he reached his car, the story he'd been telling himself that this was a clean break, a fair split, a new beginning, had started to collapse. And this was still only the second move. Because money isn't the first thing people lose when their plan fails. It's certainty. And Mark had just lost all of it. By mid-afternoon, Mark stopped pretending everything was under control. The bank had blindsided him. His lawyer had stopped returning calls, and the confidence he borrowed from his ex-girlfriend began leaking out through the cracks. I didn't need updates. The system sent them anyway. Account access attempts logged and denied. Password resets flagged and blocked. 2-factor authentication failures recorded. He tried 3 times before giving up. At 3:17 p.m., he drove to the apartment, the one he'd shown off to me weeks earlier without realizing it. Modern building, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place meant to signal a fresh start. A yellow notice was taped neatly to the door. Lease terminated. Vacate in 48 hours. Mark tore it down like it had personally insulted him. He stood there in the hallway, rereading it, his mouth opening and closing as if the words might rearrange themselves. The notice wasn't from the landlord. It was issued by Ashford Properties LLC, asset manager E. Anderson. He called the property manager in a panic. I could almost hear it, the forced calm, the entitlement masked as confusion. I live here, he said. There has to be a mistake. There wasn't. The building belonged to a holding entity under my trust. His ex-girlfriend never told him. They'd assumed ownership was irrelevant as long as rent cleared. Assumptions are expensive. When he got off the phone, she was standing behind him, arms crossed, eyes darting. You didn't say your wife owned the building, she snapped. I didn't know, Mark replied, and that was the moment the fantasy cracked. She stepped back, not toward him, but away, toward the kitchen, toward her phone, toward distance. People who run toward chaos rarely stick around for consequences. By evening, she was already less affectionate, less invested. By night, she was too tired to talk. Mark slept on the couch. The next call came after midnight. It was Rachel. Her voice was cautious, not angry. That mattered. Dad says you froze his accounts. I didn't correct her wording. He says you planned this for years. I planned for risk, I replied. Silence. She was standing at a crossroads. I could hear it in her breathing, the part of her that wanted peace, wrestling with the part that wanted truth. He says you're trying to ruin him. I opened the thinner folder on my desk, the one I'd prepared long ago for this exact conversation. Section 12, I said. What? Section 12 of the postnuptial. The clause about forfeiting cases of active deceit. It's in your Dropbox. Pause. You put it there 3 years ago, I added gently. In the same folder as your student loan breakdown. Another pause. I need to know if he's lying, she whispered. Then don't listen to me, I said. Check his phone. Start with August. The line went quiet. I knew, she said eventually. She hung up without saying goodbye. The next morning, my inbox held a single email from her university account. Subject. I read it. Attached screenshots. Messages between Mark and his ex-girlfriend. Plans, jokes, dates arranged while we were still married. A message that made my chest tighten despite everything. I'll stay calm until I cash out. She never reads the paperwork anyway. Rachel didn't text, didn't call. She didn't need to. By afternoon, Mark had called her 6 times, then 9, then left a voicemail I never heard, but could imagine, pleading, wrapped in indignation. She changed her voicemail greeting the next day. Hi, you've reached Rachel Anderson. Leave a message. No nickname, just her name. Mark lost more than money that week. He lost his witness. By Friday, his ex-girlfriend was gone, packed up, left a note on the counter about needing space. He reread it twice like it might apologize if he stared long enough. That evening there was a knock on his door. A process server. Thick envelope. Real paper, real ink. The plaintiff, Ulla Anderson. The charge, intentional interference with a trust asset. Mark called me. I didn't answer. He texted, please, we need to talk. I let the message sit unread, because when someone finally understands they miscalculated, the last thing you give them is an audience. This wasn't about revenge. It was about correction, and Mark's escape plan had officially collapsed. Mark asked for the meeting like he still had leverage. Tell her I want to see her in person, he told my lawyer. She owes me that. Owes that word again. As if 15 years of quiet labor, of stability, of patience, of cleaning up messes he never noticed were some unfinished debt on my end. I said yes, not because he deserved closure, because he needed an audience. We met downtown in a neutral building, 3rd floor, glass walls, a conference room designed to make everyone feel equally exposed. Long walnut table, no art on the walls, no comfort, just space and fluorescent honesty. His lawyer didn't come. He'd already recused himself after realizing exactly how outmatched this situation was. No one likes standing in a room when the iceberg finally surfaces. I arrived 5 minutes early. Mark arrived 9 minutes late. Sunglasses indoors, dark jacket buttoned too tightly. He looked thinner, sharper around the eyes. The confidence he once wore like armor had been sanded down to brittle defiance. Nice place, he said, sitting without greeting. I slid the folder across the table. He didn't touch it. What's this? He asked, irritation rising already. Your life, I said, on paper. He scoffed and opened it, expecting noise. Instead, he found silence in print. Exhibit A, the social media post, time-stamped, geolocated. Exhibit B, transcripts of messages, flirtation while still married, jokes about playing it smart. Exhibit C, audio, his voice laughing with a friend, saying she never reads the paperwork anyway. His hand froze. You recorded me, he snapped. No, I replied calmly. Your friend did. Turns out betrayal doesn't come with loyalty programs. The color drained from his face. Then came the clause. I'd highlighted it for him. Any attempt to emotionally coerce, manipulate, or intentionally deceive the grantor for financial gain will result in the total forfeiture of all marital and trust asset claims. He read it once, then again, then a third time slower. This is insane, he said hoarsely. No, I replied. It's notarized. His voice cracked. You can't just erase me like this. I didn't erase you. I said evenly. You wrote yourself out of the ledger. I just closed the book. He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. You think this makes you strong? I shook my head. No, it makes me free. He flipped through the remaining pages. Automatic liquidations, clawbacks, administrative dissolutions, systems he'd never bothered to understand, because he assumed the outcome would always bend in his favor. You planned all of this to trap me. You never looked. You were too focused on what you deserved to notice what was protected. Silence swallowed the room. For the first time since I'd known him, Mark had nothing to say. No argument, no charm, no angle. Just the quiet aftermath of a plan that collapsed under its own arrogance. He stood abruptly, chair scraping back. I hope you're proud of this. I nodded. I am. He paused at the door. Almost said something. Almost tried one last manipulation. Then he left. No goodbye. No performance. Just the echo of footsteps in a hallway that didn't belong to him anymore. The envelope arrived the following Tuesday. No courier, no signature required. Just a plain white packet in his mailbox, like any other piece of suburban noise. Inside were 2 documents. The first, notification of irrevocable dissolution of private marital trust authority. The second, executed transfer of all nullified marital claims. No judge's name, no courtroom, no appeal, because this had never needed the courts. The end had been built into the beginning, effective as of the moment you stated, "You never loved me." That was the line. By then, everything else was already gone. The apartment reclaimed, the lawsuit active. The ex-girlfriend vanished. Rachel silent. Mark sat alone in a kitchen that wasn't his anymore, rereading the words, like they might soften if he stared long enough. He opened his phone and scrolled to the photo, the one with her. Champagne raised, smiling like a victor. He hovered over delete, then stopped. Because you don't delete a tombstone. I was at home when the confirmation came through. Trust dissolved, claims nullified, process complete. I stood by the window and watched the evening settle over the neighborhood. No music, no drama. Just the hum of a house that finally belonged to me. Mark thought he was the one leaving. What he never understood was this. I wasn't abandoned. I was released. And in the end, he didn't just lose a wife. He lost the story he thought he was telling. Because I wasn't a footnote in his life.